What's up, guys? I'm SaltEMike, and this is your Star Citizen Week in Review for June 29th, 2020. This video might have made it up late because I just ran into some audio trouble, specifically with my noise gate. It just stopped working, so we're using a new one, and those things take a little time to dial in. So if my voice does get cut off occasionally in this video, I will be spending the rest of the week for next week's video to try and dial that in so it's just nice and crisp and perfect. But let's jump into the video. You know, no need to apologize or complain. Things happen. It's 2020, right? So for patch notes updates this week, we don't have any, and the reason being is 3.10 is still in Evo Kadi, and it's June 29th. They did make a post, I don't remember which post it was, but implying that 3.10 will go live in July. Usually, the patches go live at the end of June, or this specific quarter patch, the second quarter patch, usually is somewhat open in the PTU at the end of June, but obviously they're going to need a little bit more time. Hopefully next week, the week after, don't really know. So then moving on to roadmap updates, this was also kind of light. Everything just went into polishing basically for 3.10. So listing them off, we had the Lightning Sniper Rifle, the Lightning Pistol, the Gemini SMG, and the Mass Driver Revision. So all just weapons. But it doesn't stop there. There was some roadmap progress. The only things that are not done for 3.10 is the Bartender, which is just the bane of our existence, right? And new targeting methodology. There was also some slight progress made in 3.11, tiny bit on improved throw, and just a little bit on the 100i. There's some tasks that had things added to them, therefore they lost progress in 3.11, and that was cargo decks and the grenade launcher. Now, the meat of today's video is in the video updates. So ISC was about PvP, or I guess about ships and flight and combat. And these things are horrible as updates, whether they're written updates from CIG or video updates. This is one of those things that when 3.10 comes out, we get it in our hands, and then we can start providing feedback. I'm going to do my best to touch on these items, but there is a lot to kind of take in here, and it's difficult to really... honestly, it's difficult to take them in because they're just not in our hands, and it's difficult to discuss how they feel, how they work, and does it make the game fun. So let's start out with insights into why the changes that they've already done, maybe why they haven't worked yet.
You don't know upfront what's going to be fun, right? You have to experience these things, and so we kind of embrace that kind of uncertainty now.
So I'd say that the experimental kind of side to it has had its kind of pluses and minuses.
This way of working with like rough design goals meant that we get very short iteration loops and very short steps towards the actual combat experience that we want to have.
Personally, I don't know what to think about this. It almost seems like an excuse for the lack of changes or lack of sweeping changes and only doing small ones. But maybe their excuse is valid. So it's one of those things that I like to post questions to you is, what do you think about these comments and doing these small iterations and getting feedback and constantly making changes, but always tweaking and never, leaving something while it's decent, which I think a lot of PvPers would say, oh, this patch was a good one or that patch was a good one. I think they have some nostalgia there, and yeah, I just want to hear what you guys think. I think the idea of tweaking at this stage of Star Citizen, when nothing is really a reality yet, is kind of fine. It's just we suffer for it occasionally. They also touch on, and this is probably the most important thing, is the atmospheric flight is what they've been focusing on, and how the shape of the ship determines its handling.
The shape of the ship and the wings affect pretty much everything on the ship handling. And this is like something that's really important to me personally, because now I need to take care of my ship. I cannot just like speed up and hope that IFCS will correct all the errors that I'm doing with my piloting skills. No, IFCS cannot overcorrect everything.
The shape of the ship affects the lift and drag. These debug planes, we size them to either increase or reduce the lift and drag in any given axis, and then that will increase or decrease the maneuverability of whatever axis you're traveling in.
Now, this is all cool stuff. We've heard this before in their feature plans and talks and posts in the past. And if you're new to the project, I shared this just for you. There's a lot of people that have been getting into Star Citizen in recent times, and maybe you've just happened to come across my channel. Say hello in the comments if you have. So basically, if ships don't look like they should fly in Atmo, which is basically if they don't have wings, they shouldn't do too well. But VTOL does come into play in that as well. Speaking of things that come into play, how does weather play into this whole new system?
To avoid any knocks or any turbulence throwing your ship around and potentially causing you to crash, you might want to bring a beefier, heavier ship so you can have a more streamlined journey to your destination. Weather's going to play a big part in how players approach atmospheric flight, as let's say you were on Microtech with very strong winds. The wind is going to blow your ship in certain directions, and you're going to want to counteract that.
The fact that tankier and larger ships don't get blown away by wind makes sense. For example, if you've ever been in like a small plane flying, you really feel the turbulence, and if you've been in a big plane, it's just little light bumps for the most part, unless it's really heavy turbulence. I find this to be really cool. Speaking of that, there's a plane flying over me right now. So if you're in a smaller ship and you have some wind blowing, you actually have to counter against that. I think this complexity might make the game a little bit too complex and actually less fun. But again, this is one of those things, and specifically for like PvP, is where like you're fighting and you have to fight to win. It seems like a little bit too much. It's just another one of those things like we have to get in our hands, but I have that feeling and I want to speak out about it. But yeah, it just seems like it might be a little bit difficult. Now they moved on to combat, and what do they want for it?
So we want combat in Star Citizen to be a varied experience. We don't want there to be just a single way to win. We don't want people to be min-maxing stats. We don't want people to just rely on alpha strikes. And that really promotes player choice over just ship selection and item selection.
So he gave a big description there, but there wasn't a lot of substance to it for me, specifically about choice. So he says he wants to give us choices, but the only choices that we do have are the choices that they want to not have be as important, which is your ship and your components. I know he means that he wants the choices to be the choices that we make while in combat, while flying. But I don't and can't figure out what those choices could possibly be because we don't have this system in our hands yet. So a lot of this video comes down to like what this statement was. It was a lot of talking, but not a lot of anything that we can take and use, right? Because it just doesn't matter until you use the actual system and play it. And that's when we have to give that feedback on what the issues are, and that's when they need to be listening. And I hope they do. Then they moved on to scanning, and scanning is changing kind of big time in this, where you can gather information before locking on a ship. We talked about this last week, but this is more of just providing you the visuals of what we talked about. And again, you can also ping ships, which you can sort of lock onto them and ping them for your other members of your ship, or maybe even your party, I'm not really sure yet, and provide information of like what target you want to fight next. They also showed turrets, which is another more of a visual thing. We did talk about the changes a lot last week, but the main thing that we should probably pay attention here is it appears that when the circle is closed, that's when you're the most accurate. But the issue is the circle's been closed a lot in this video, but the person seems to be missing still a lot of their shots. So it's another one of those like we'll have to see when we get it in our hands. And if you haven't watched this video yet, the link will be in the description below. The person who recorded all of this fighting is way worse than me at the game, and I'm horrible. So they also talked about sensitivity with the turrets, that you can adjust it on the fly with your mouse wheel or probably some other implementation if you decide to use a HOTAS. So if someone's further away, you can change the sensitivity so you're more accurate and more precise. And then if they're close, you can change it to be more precise and more accurate as well, which is pretty cool. And at the end of ISC, they added what was called a patch report. It was basically the sprint report, but for everything we're going to see in the next patch. And yeah, I mean, I'm kind of not going to touch on it too much here because you should probably play the patch yourself and give feedback. And I don't want to show too much and talk, it literally just lists everything that's going to be in the patch. And I think it's better that you experience those things in the state that Star Citizen is actually in, rather than the way that they attempt to show it here on the video, which is basically in its best light. Now we move on to Calling All Devs, which is another kind of combat PvP based thing, and the first thing they touch on is EVE-style security systems.
Where players want to be able to find the PvP versus where players don't want to find it, they want to focus more on PvE. I would start there. So they started, what system should I be in? What system, do I want to go to? And
if I'm in Terra, I probably should feel pretty safe. If I'm in Pyro, I should be looking over my shoulder.
Exactly.
I like this idea. A lot of us that have been following the project for a while knew that this was sort of a thing, but it does make sense to share with you in case, again, you're new to the project. There will also, don't worry, there will also be like hotspots in these areas. So Stanton, like he said, is more of a lawful area, and but we do have places like Grimhex and Jumptown and other places like Reclamation and Disposal Orinth, right? Is the PvP slider back?
In the past, I know that we've talked about like a PvP slider, and we're not going to have anything that's player facing, but obviously for us as developers, we still want to be able to tune, how much, if the players are gearing more towards PvP, based off their actions, then that's more of the content that we would be pushing towards them. Whether those be bounties or assassination missions or those types of things.
Okay, so not really, but as long as you can change directions in terms of like, I might want to get a bunch of mining missions early on in my career, but then I've earned enough money to buy a combat ship and I want to get more involved in PvP. As long as we're able to make a shift in those career choices and the mission system will provide us missions based on that shift, I think this is a great system and very cool. The next thing they do is touch on physical inventories. I'm going to preface this because this dude can talk, and to keep this at a reasonable length, this video, he does talk a lot about the choices that you have to make as far as what you bring with you really mattering for the fight.
Once you get into combat, all of the previous decisions that you've made are going to influence how that combat plays out. And that's why when you take the whole of the core gameplay loop, there is a beginning in terms of the preparation, in terms of how you set up, then obviously the combat phase, in terms of you engaging your plan, reacting to what happens, how that pans out. And then there is also a post-combat phase which completes the loop, and that post-combat phase is the looting mechanics in terms of, okay, what can I take? And if you're like full to the brim with like, hey, I just filled my backpack, well, you're not going to be able to just carry everything out, and you might be like, oh, actually I'm going to drag this guy back to my ship, or maybe I want to take someone alive. And so when you talk about the full combat loop, you can see that whole premise of how just physical inventory by itself becomes a huge game changer.
Again, a couple weeks back, we talked about how physical inventories will change everything. And I still believe this. I cut out a lot of what he said, but what I don't like is they seem to think the core gameplay happens before you get in combat and after. And the issue here is they're not focusing on what is really important. Or they are, but they don't seem to be making it as much of a priority, or there's blockers getting in the way. And that is the actual fights, guys. The actual fights. That's the core gameplay. Right? So we're talking about how the player status system and physical inventories affect PvP. But they affect the main thing, the PvP. And the entire video, this dude talked about everything but, and spent about this much time on the actual fight. And that's the part that I'm worried about with Star Citizen, is the core elements of the game are the actual actions, right? Whether it's mining, exploration, cargo hauling, or PvP. It's the actual actions, not all the steps leading up to the actions. But all the steps leading up to the actions tend to be very visually pleasing or interesting, and they seem to be focusing on these and not the game. And those are the things that make me the way I am, skeptical, and that's what I have issues with Star Citizen. And that's why I've always been the way I have been, because this has always been the focus. No matter what the priority is, the focus never seems to be quite enough on the actual core experience. And it's scary. And then they move on to basically how these inventories will work, and they showed it, I think 2 weeks ago, when I did talk about how physical inventories would really change things. But here, they talk about it more.
You can see now with the personal inner thought that, we have the wheel and you can see where you're mining. And that is actually going to be changed to what we're calling now is the external inventory. And it was never the intention that it was always going to be a wheel. It was actually going to go to a grid system now. But it won't be just a grid system like, you're having to manage everything in the grid or you're playing Tetris or anything like that. It's actually a really innovative system where it's almost like a list, but it almost think of it like when you're moving an app on an iPhone.
Right.
How it melds around that. Yeah. And so what that gives us, it gives us an overview of your character, an overview of all of the items that you're going to have, and you're going to be able to directly interface with your character and the items that you have, and vice versa, you'll be able to directly interface with external inventory. So for example, other players' backpacks on the ground, or crates, or cargo, or whatever, anything that doesn't have necessarily a physical representation in the world. That what I just described there is kind of like the end goal, and that's when we have item persistence and iCache comes online. But the first kind of next step is to kind of interact that external inventory, that UI interface, which will be an extension of the personal inner thoughts as it is now. You can still just press I and open the inventory. And you will have the grid-based system, and it'll still be just commodities at the beginning. So that means that food and drink or minables, the things that you can currently put in your backpack, you'll be able to still put in your backpack.
Now, the big thing here is, always talking about the future, it sounds great, right? And then he cuts it off and goes, but you'll be disappointed by the fact that what we're working on getting in first is exactly what you have now, but it just looks different, right? Like, it just works a little bit different. So that was kind of disappointing. That was like now I'm sad. But yeah, so hopefully the progress of this update goes sort of quickly and only takes maybe a couple quarters, but I doubt it. So we'll have to see. And then moving on to our other updates, there's quite a bit here actually this week. Where the hell is the Squadron 42 update video? They do touch on it here. They said it didn't live up to their standards. They wanted to add more B-roll, and basically what it is it's checking in with Brian Chambers and other devs with what they're working on. I don't know about you guys, but at this point, I don't even care whether they put the video out, and I also am tired of the lack of the poor management of everything, right? Like, or the lack of communication internally. If they can't communicate internally very well to us, it shows why their communication to us externally is so poor as well, right? And that really is what it is there. So they also showed us a sneak peek this week, and it was of the Microtech hacking chip. I'm kind of curious on how good this thing is. It looks pretty fancy. They also have a jump point available, if you guys don't know what that is. If you're a subscriber of Star Citizen, they do a monthly kind of like magazine sort of publication, and it's pretty cool. And then every year they turn it into a hardcover that you guys can purchase. And there was also, we've talked about this a little bit, the Banu Translation. This is CIG actually providing the official translation in a post, so you guys can feel free to check that out. Links are of all these things, of course, are in the description below. Alien Week, they provided the contest winners. So for the First Contact, winners are provided here, and the cook-off winners are provided here. Again, links in the description. You guys can go check those out. And then finally, we had a lore post for Lost Squad. And guys, that will do it. That will do it this week. Thank you so much for watching. Again, I hope the audio was pretty good. And we'll have to see. So, yeah, we're still struggling with my work schedule, but I did notice the schedule lady at my job was at my job on a Sunday, and was there before I got there and was there after I left. So, crossing my fingers that they're kind of really trying to hone this thing in. but I have no idea where my schedule will stand in the future. The uncertainty is killing me. I love to play hockey, and I have teams that are asking me to play for them, and I don't know if I can commit because I have no idea what my work schedule is. My stream is suffering, so feel free to stop by there for the few hours a day I'm able to play now. And obviously I didn't do an answer the call this week because of the timing of things, as well as honestly just the lack of discussion points for Star Citizen. And yeah, I mean, it's really suffering my content creation, and I'm really starting to get frustrated because I'm at a point where I need them to just give me schedule options so I can start prioritizing this for you guys some more, and honestly for me a lot more. And I just haven't had that opportunity yet. So the uncertainty and the not knowing your future can be very frustrating, and I'm starting to get extremely frustrated now. But with that said, guys, leave a like on the video. You guys have been really awesome with all the likes. And I didn't say it earlier in the video, so now I'm going to see the difference between saying it early and saying it later. So I might become that YouTuber that's, starts the video out with leave a like and subscribe and all that stupid stuff at the beginning, just because it works. So guys, with that said, leave a like, comment below, and subscribe for more weeks in review in the future, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye, everybody.